have a special guest. He's actually called out to the Philippines, and he's going to be sharing his knowledge with that part of the world. And we have a great, amazing, mind with regards to this product, with all of the substantiation behind the products. I think she has the coolest last name I've ever seen. Beer, Dr. Christina Beer. She has a PhD, and I just want to give you a little background on Christina. One, thank you for filling in for Dr. Dixon. We're going to be talking about Omega Plus and all of the benefits, all of the, how does this fit into our stacks? How does it fit in with our activators? How does it fit into the product line? Why is it so important? And I can't wait to get to that. But before that, I want to give you a little background on Christina. For those that do know her or don't know her, she's from Stockholm, Sweden, the Scandinavian places or countries that I've yet to visit, and I can't even wait to do that. But she has 3 siblings, all of which still live in Sweden. After high school, she came to the US on a tennis scholarship, believe it or not. And so she's very athletic, very gifted. And that landed her in what is called Weber State College. It's actually north of Salt Lake City, Utah. A tremendous school. She then went back to Sweden to work on a medical microbiology field, developing methods for antibiotic resistance and pathogens. And she missed the US so much that she came back to start on her PhD, where she did that at the Utah State University, which is further north. It's in Logan, Utah. It's about 2 hours north of Salt Lake City. And there is where she found her better half, or her wonderful man, who is from Texas. And they started their career at Weider Nutrition. For those that know that name, Weider is a huge company in the nutritional world. And just not anyone is allowed to work there. And so after that, she developed many supplements and did a side business and developed many supplements and wrote a few publications regarding raw materials and their uses in nutrition. And after Weider, she was sold to RB. She then ran her own consulting business for 7 years until she came aboard with LifeVantage and develops products, write claims, substantiation files for the products, and also does some of the product training. Christina Beer, thank you so much for being on with us. And wow, what a pedigree. And we're so glad you landed in Utah.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm going to turn some time over to you, and we're going to talk about Omega Plus. We're going to talk about the benefits. I don't know if you have a presentation that you want to share, can share screen, or you and I just going back and forth. But I think the biggest first kickoff question would be, we're talking about good fats, bad fats, all of these types of things. We get our product over in the Atlantic Ocean. What are the importance of that? We got a lot of questions from the field, but we're turning the time over to you, and can't thank you enough for being with us.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan, for the friendly introduction. I don't know if it's all true, but for sure. So, but anyway, I love this state. I love being here. I love working at LifeVantage. I get to do what I love to do. I love to share. I have a presentation about half an hour for you. It's a little science-based, a little bit more into details on what fats are, what fatty acids are, and why omega-3s especially are important for us, and what they really do in the body for us. So I'm going to try and share my screen. If you want to ask questions in between, that's fine. Or if you want to just wait until afterwards, we can also do that. So let's see if I'm technically advanced in sharing my screen. Let's see here, apps. Where do I share my screen? Share screen. There we go. Okay, share. Can you all see a presentation going on? Yes? Okay, let's start with it. So
it looks great.
Okay, awesome. Let me get some of my other screens up here. Okay, so you still see a nice screen with a red dot in it circulating. Okay, awesome. Yes, I got my PhD in nutrition and food science at Utah State many eons ago. And I've actually had the opportunity to use my degree in what I do. I use it every day, actually. So I'm really fortunate to be able to do that and do something that I love to do. We're going to talk about omega-3, omega plus. I mean, that's our product. I have it here next to me. I take it every day, and I'm really happy we have it. I have to say this is for educational purposes only. And so be sparesome in how you share this information. All right, here it is. Here's our omega. That's what we're going to talk about, this specific aspect right here. It's packed with omega-3 fatty acids, especially EPA and DHA, and we'll talk more about why that is important. We will I'll briefly mention vitamin D3. We added that into there at a good dose because it's a fat soluble vitamin, and the people all over more in the Western world is vitamin D deficient. So we thought, well, what a good place to add vitamin D to it so everybody can get some. Okay, what is fat? Fat, let's first talk about what fat is. It's one of the 3 macronutrient groups in our diet. It's called a macronutrient. The other 2 are protein and carbohydrate. It's not water soluble. We all know that. We can't mix it with water. It can be liquid or solid, and we'll talk about the differences, what is going to be solid and what's going to be liquid. It's a way for our bodies to store extra calories. Fatty acids, it's another name for fat, is fatty acids. It's required to absorb our vitamins. You've all heard about fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. They're all fat soluble vitamins, so we need fats for vitamin and mineral absorption. They're essential for proper nerve functioning, and they're required to build healthy cells. And if I'm becoming a little science nerdy, please let me know, and I'll just try and say it in little easier terms.
You're perfect. We can geek out with you as much as you want us to.
Okay, awesome. All right. So another word, like I said, for fat is fatty acids. And it really only is a fancy word for a long unbranched chain of carbon molecules. So these are carbon molecules, the chemical abbreviation for carbon, and all life is made up of carbon, oxygen, and water, and hydrogen. So on one end of this fancy chain, we have a carboxyl group. The COOH is called carboxyl. And on the other end, we have a CH3, a methyl group. And these fatty acids don't just float around in the body. They have to be attached to a backbone. And this backbone, this cartoonish backbone, looks like this. So this backbone can be, we'll talk about that on the next slide. It can be various things, but all of these tennis balls, see tennis, my previous slide. These chains, these tennis balls are attached by a bond, and then they're attached to a backbone, okay? So that's important to know. There's a backbone, and then there's these tails of tennis balls or fatty acids. So depending on what this backbone is, makes it into a certain type of fatty acid. Well, you've all heard about triglycerides. When you go to the doctor, you hear about your triglyceride levels. They're measuring your triglyceride levels. So here's a glycerol backbone. It's just a 3-carbon chain link. And then you have these fatty acids right here, and right here attached to this backbone right here. And they're attached through a fancy ester bond. The COC is called an ester bond. So this becomes a triglyceride because the backbone is a glycerol. We have phospholipids because one of the fatty acids is replaced by a phosphate group. But then we also have cholesterol as a backbone, and we have a fatty acid attached up here. So this is the cholesterol we're all talking about, okay? So there's various types of fatty acids. They're all based on the length of the carbon chain. but they're also based on the number of bonds between these carbon molecules, between the tennis balls, right? So as an example, we have short chain fatty acids. They're usually not more than 6 carbons in length. We have medium chain fatty acid, long chain fatty acids, and this is where our EPA and DHA fall under. And then we have very long chains that are more than 22 carbons in length. And then we have some fancy words called saturation and unsaturation. And the saturation means that there's only one chemical bond between the black balls right here, the tennis balls, and there's only one bond, and it makes it a straight chain. Whereas if we have bonds in between here, like in this one, we have 2 chemical bonds between these 2 molecules, and makes it, gives it, it's an unsaturation. They call it unsaturation in the chain, and it makes a kink or a bend in the chain. And this is really what we want to see in a molecule. And here's why. Oh, let's just go back to here's some other examples of fatty acids. So short chain fatty acid, we have acetic acid, which we all have in our cupboard as vinegar. We have butyric acid, which we can find in stinky cheese. We have caprylic, capric, which are medium chain fatty acids, and we find those in coconut oil, but we can also find them in, if you're a workout buff and you consume MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, these are the types of fatty acids you will consume for energy production, for quick energy. And then we have the long chain fatty acids. So we have EPA, we have DHA, we have linoleic acid, which we find in vegetable oils. And then we have these really, really long fatty acids, which we find in beeswax and carnauba wax. So what are some of the sources of fatty acids? We have animal sources, and there's a reason I put these in red, and then we have plant sources. So the fatty acids from animal sources like lard and butter tend to be saturated. So they tend to be straight chains and don't have hardly any double bonds in them, and thus they're solid at room temperature. Then usually plant sources, fatty acids from plants, are usually unsaturated, and thus they become liquid at room temperature. So these bonds actually decide whether you have a solid fat or a liquid fat. So that's remember that. Next, in order to really understand the importance of fatty acids, especially omega-3, we actually have to go back to our fundamental cell biology. Does anyone know how many cells a human body on average has? It has about 40 trillion cells. That's 12 zeros behind 40. That's a hell of a lot of,
That's a lot.
cells. That's a lot of cells. And what is a cell? Well, the cell is our smallest unit of life in our bodies. But there's in the world or in the universe, there are 2 types of cells. One is the prokaryote, which are bacteria, usually bacteria. They're single cell organisms, and they differ. They don't have a defined nucleus where they have their DNA structure in there. They usually only have 1 chromosome, very few cell structures inside the cell, and they usually don't have mitochondria. They get their energy from another source, another mechanism. Then we have eukaryotes, and we and animals and plants, we are all eukaryotes. We have a true nucleus with a membrane. That's the membrane is surrounded of the nucleus. We have a linear DNA that's coiled into something called chromosomes. We have organelles such as mitochondria, other structures, a Golgi apparatus, etc., inside our cell. So we are eukaryotes, bacteria are prokaryotes. And here's the difference if you just look at it schematically. you see that the eukaryotic cell looks much more complicated than the prokaryotic cell. The prokaryotic cell, the DNA is floating around inside the cell. It usually has a cell membrane around it for structural component to keep it all together. They usually have pili or flagella to allow them to move around. Now, if you look at our cells, you see we have a defined cell nucleus structure that's surrounded by a cell membrane. We have mitochondria, and we all know about mitochondria, our energy powerhouses. We have lots of these copies in our cells, and they're all surrounded by a membrane. We have mechanisms to translate DNA into protein. It's called endoplasmic reticulum that translates our genetic material to a protein, and that has its own cell membrane. So eukaryotes have lots more cell membrane surface, and therefore the fatty acids become really important for us. Complicated, but when you look at it, it's like everything inside our cells is enveloped with a cell membrane to protect it and to give it stability and for functionality as well. So every cell, of course, we're going to focus on the eukaryote because that's what we are. We're not going to worry about bacteria. So every cell that we can have is surrounded by a cell membrane. It separates the interior of our cell, which is called the cytoplasm, from the outside of the cell, the extra fluid, extracellular fluid. So the cell membrane, we're going to go a little bit more into functionality of what it does. It allows nutrients basically to enter and waste to exit. It controls that. And like I mentioned, every organelle, the little things inside our cells, like mitochondria, the nucleus, has its own cell membrane. And if our cell membranes don't work right, we don't feel right. So it's essential for homeostasis and balance in our body. So far, do I have everyone with me?
Yes, this is incredible.
Okay, so our cell, like we talked about what a fatty acid is, and it needs a backbone, correct? So this is basically what a cell membrane is made up of. This is the cartoon rendition of a cell membrane. It's a double layer. This is one layer. This is the other layer. It's called a phospholipid bilayer. And if you take one of these little things off, it's going to look like this. So we have the backbone basically, and we usually have a phosphate attached to it to make it even more water loving. So this head is water loving. This tail, where we have all our fatty acids attached to, is fat loving. So in chemistry, for everything to be in balance and at the lowest energy state, it will automatically go into this state and into a ball, basically. So that's why our cells are round. That's why most of our things are round within the cell. So you can look at it, for example, if you put a drop of vegetable oil into water. So you have a ball floating in the water, but if you add more oil, these oil droplets are eventually all going to bind together and make one big fat oil, because that's in chemistry, that is the lowest state of energy and everything is in balance. And that's what we want within our cells. Okay. So, but it's not as simple as that, right? So if you look at the cell, there are other things embedded within our cells. We have, for example, transportation channels, which transports proteins in and out. And of course, there are mechanisms to control that. We have cholesterol to give it a little bit more rigidity and to use as precursors for other mechanisms and other reactions. We have carbohydrate chains on the outside of the cell that identifies what type of cell it is, whether it's a kidney cell or a liver cell or an eye cell or something like that. So each component, this all put together, functions as one unit for the health of the cell. Okay? All right. So in summary, really what a cell membrane does is it regulates what enters and exits the cell. It's a structure, it has a structural function because it keeps the cell contents together. The more important things, or the more, to me, interesting things are it allows communication with other cells, and it's a site of various chemical reactions, so it's cell signaling. But then there's lots and lots of other important functions that we don't need to cover in this presentation. So let's get back to omegas. What are omega fatty acids? Well, it's a family of polyunsaturated fatty acids. So it has more than one double bond. So it has several sections of the chain where it has more than two bonds. The first double bond can be found on the 3, 6, 7, or 9th carbon from the end of the chain. And really, when you look at the literature, what's out there, there's well over 67,000 published articles on omega-3. And it's one of the most studied nutrients out there. And I even looked at Google, and I just quickly did a Google Scholar search, and there's well over 100,000 articles at this point. So
wow.
It's a very interesting ingredient, and it's also a very important and essential ingredient. Okay. So omega-3 is just one type of omega fatty acid. It has its first double bond starting from the end of this chain at the 3rd carbon. Okay, so omega is the last letter in the Greek alphabet, and the first is alpha, of course, and the alpha one is attached to the backbone, and so it becomes omega-3 where the first double bond occurs. And that's really how you name these things. We'll go more into details a little bit. Examples of omega fatty acids, we have EPA, which is a 20 carbon. If you look at the blue numbers, that's the length of the chain, the fatty acid chain. So EPA has 20 carbons, it's 20 carbons long. You look at the 5, it has 5 double bonds or unsaturations within that chain. And the first one occurs on the 3rd carbon from the end, the red number. So you go in from the 3rd carbon, 1, 2, 3, the first double bond. It has 5 double bonds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And therefore it becomes, the abbreviation is this. And it's eicosapentaenoic acid. I think that's Greek for 25, for 20 with 5 double bond fatty acid. So that's how chemists all over the world communicate, so that way it's a standardized numbering system of fatty acids. People know what they're talking about. And that's really the only reason they're doing it this way. DHA is very similar. It is a 22 carbon fatty acid with 6 double bonds, and the first double bond starts at the end on the 3rd carbon right here. And then I put arachidonic acid in here because we'll be talking about this omega-6 fatty acid in a few minutes. It's a 20 chain carbon with 4 double bonds, and the first one starts at omega-6. And we also put this one in our omega plus because it's a little obscure omega fatty acid. So we thought we'd put it in there to be a little different than everybody else and have an array of various omega fatty acids in there. That was science nerdy talk, but I think that tells you why something is called omega-3 or omega-6 or omega-7. It's just a matter of counting double bonds and where it starts on the chain.
I'm going to be so smart at dinner tonight with the family. I'm going to blow people away with this.
You're going to need a cheat sheet.
I've been taking screenshots. This is great.
Yeah. That's fun. So why is it so important? So the tricky part with fatty acids and double bonds is the more double bonds, the merrier. And when you look at this, this is more or less like a 2D rendition of the DHA, where every time you have a double bond, there's a certain type of kink. And when I do a 3D or trying to do a 3D rendition, this is really what it's going to look like. So it's more, it curls around more like a spiral, right? So, and that's what we want. We really want this, and I'll tell you in a little bit why. I guess you guys can maybe already figure it out, but we'll see. Okay. So why are omega fatty acids so important for us? So as you saw on the blue, when you do the blue counting, we cannot make long chain fatty acids past 9 carbons with double bonds. We just can't do that as humans, so we have to consume it. So we're limited in how long we can make fatty acids. We're actually unable to synthesize the omega-3 fatty acid alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, and omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic acid. And we need these as starting material to create EPA and DHA in the body. So we have to consume these ingredients, and we can get these from our diet. So functions of the some functions of omega fatty acids, we talked about that. It allows for fluidity in the cell membrane, and we'll talk about this in a minute. They become signaling molecules within a cell, and they are used for energy production through something called beta oxidation in the mitochondria. So here's, let's talk about the cell membrane and its fluidity. So we talked about that there's a lipid bilayer. And if it's fluid, it can bend but not stretch. And if we have more saturated fats like here, which are straight chains, then the membrane, our cell membranes, become more rigid and more stiff. So you can hold your fingers in front of you, put the fingertips right next to each other, and then try and move things around. It becomes really rigid. So the more kinks we put into these fatty acid chains, the more fluid, the more flexible, the more movable our membrane becomes, and it's healthier to do it that way. And so there's more wiggle room for things to happen across the membranes. So this is what we're looking for. This is what we want. So if we have more fluidity through the cell, across the cell membrane, it allows for better and more efficient workings of the cell components. It enables the membranes to, the proteins to better diffuse and more rapidly diffuse into the lipid bilayer and to interact and do what they're supposed to do in the cells and allow for better cell signaling. So here's an interesting fact. If the body uses the fatty acids that are found in cell membranes for reactions in the body, in the cells. And they can be released from the cell membrane through external or internal triggers, such as trauma or other triggers. So there's a competition inside the lipid bilayer between omega and omega-6, where omega-3 actually displaces the omega-6 fatty acids if possible, because we want omega-3s in the cells, because they're, especially the long chain omega-3s, because of their inherent nature. So omega fatty acids also are involved in the cell signaling like we talked about, and we'll go a little bit more into detail on this one because it's so important. The cell signalings that we do across cell membranes are involved in immune signaling, in neuronal functioning and signaling, in signaling pro and anti-inflammatory signaling as part of our normal health responses, cardiovascular and metabolic functions throughout this across the cell membranes. And a large group of these signaling molecules are called eicosanoids, and they're important throughout the body because of the good and bad inflammatory aspects in this aspect right here. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that because it's so important. Omega-6 fatty acid is converted into something called arachidonic acid. It's still, so this is the omega-6 pathway, and this is the omega-3 pathway inside the body. And they both pathways use the same enzymes to actually go through something called elongation process. So they make these chains longer because we want them to be longer for various aspects. So the omegas on this side are converted into EPA and DHA down here. And EPA and DHA are precursors to good inflammatory substances right here. Now, if we take the omega-6 family and go through the elongation process and end up at arachidonic acid, arachidonic acid is primarily a precursor for bad inflammatory substances. So, so we do want to push it into this direction. All right, but our diet is actually tilted more towards the omega-6 side of things because if we eat more omega-6s from grains and things like that, then this enzyme is going to forget about omega-3, the omega-3 pathway. It's primarily going to focus on this pathway. So, but we do need both pathways because they're all these little inflammatory substances, whether they're good or bad, are important for our body to be healthy, to stay in balance. Okay, so we need both pathways. The tidbit is, as we age, only about 5 to 15% of linolenic acid on the omega-3 family side is converted to EPA, and only about 0.5% of that is converted into DHA. So, so as we age, this enzyme becomes less active, and if we eat more of the omega family fatty acids, then of course we're going to push it all into this side of things. Okay, but we do require both pathways for overall health, and they're both essential.
Curious question,
yes,
Tina. Can you ultimately eradicate the omega-3 strand if our diet is heavily on the omega-6? Will the body eventually just not even recognize that? Or is it something that if we start consuming the omega plus that we could rebuild that and reactivate that in the body so that we can use those inflammatories?
So we're inherently low in omega-3 diet just by nature of our lifestyle. Mm-hmm. We don't live close to the sea. We don't live close to fresh fish, and fish has gotten a bad rap, you know, oh, you eat fish, gross kind of thing. So if we push it into the omega-6, I don't think we'll ever be eradicating this, because if we do, we're not going to be sitting around much longer. Mm-hmm. But, we can change the tilt of this by consuming more omega-3 fatty acids.
Got it.
So we can change this balance, and we want to change it into this direction, right? Mm-hmm. We want to change it to this direction. But we need both pathways. We even need this pathway because we need to get rid of the bad stuff in our bodies, and that happens by activating these substances, you know, and get rid of the toxic stuff in the body. Right. So we need both pathways. Okay. But even going now, I mean, it does produce some good things too, right? So it doesn't just give you the bad inflammatory substances, it gives you other substances too. So it's not all bad if you go down the omega-6. So we need omega-6. Right. Okay. And we actually need more of the omega-6 than as in a ratio. And I'll show you in a little bit why. So the third function of omega fatty acids is for energy production, and it goes through something called beta oxidation, where once the fatty acid is inside the cell, it goes to the mitochondria and it gets transported into the mitochondria, where it's ultimately broken down into ATP, into energy. And the longer the chain is, the more cycles it can go through to be broken down. Because every time it gets broken down, it loses 2 carbons. And the longer this chain is, the more often it can go through the cycling. It's a cycling step. So the longer the fatty acid, the more ATP is generated.
And really ATP would just be energy of the cell, correct?
ATP is the energy of the cell, yes. That's what mitochondria are there for. They create energy.
Beautiful.
Okay, so why do we need to consume more omega-3 fatty acids? Our body is not very efficient in converting dietary ALA to EPA and DHA, because the majority of it actually goes to beta oxidation, goes to energy production. So we have to consume EPA and DHA. The recommended intake by the WHO, who's done tons and tons of studies, shows that we want close to a 4-to-1 intake of omega-6 to omega-3. But in our Western diet, because we eat so much bread and pasta and that kind of stuff, it's usually pushed 10 or 25 to 1. So we need to change this balance back to 4-to-1. Now the theory is even that we want a 1-to-1 ratio. So, or even a 2-to-1 ratio. I mean, a 1-to-2 ratio. So there's various studies going on to show what ratio do we really need. So therefore, since it's very inefficient to convert the dietary ALA, we want to consume the building blocks instead, EPA and DHA. And the only way we can get it is from fatty fish. So if you're on a vegetarian diet, then you're going to be getting this alpha-linolenic acid, which is not very easily converted to EPA and DHA, of like flaxseed and things like that. So that's why you have to really load on those ingredients.
So that's an interesting question. So if you are a vegetarian, you're going to consume more than what the recommended daily allotment would be. Is that correct? Or is
no. So there are seeds out there that have the right omega. They have omega-3, but let me go back to this slide here. This slide right here. You can consume as much as you want of this through your diet, vegetarian. But the conversion from this part going down to here is very, very slow. And most of this is converted into energy in the mitochondria.
Got it.
Majority of it. So unless you're really overloading on this, you're not going to make enough EPA or DHA, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really should be supplementing with omega plus to get the right amounts, or get at least a supplementation of your EPA and DHA.
Right.
Okay.
This is fantastic.
All right. Okay, let's go. So one of the summaries is did we do summaries already? No, not yet.
No.
So fatty acids are long or short chains of carbon molecules that can be unsaturated. So one bond between the carbons, or unsaturated, which is the double bonds, or saturated, which is the single bond, which is the straight chain. Fatty acids are found in every living cell membrane. In your eukaryotes, we are eukaryotes. The fatty acids in the cell membrane is required for integrity, basically, for fluidity, flexibility, protection of the cell, for reactions to be able to occur across the cell in a more effective way. Fatty acids also are used as signaling molecules within the cells, and we just looked at the eicosanoid pathways, but there's many other pathways I just highlighted this one because I think this is the most important one. And we also use fatty acids for energy substrate in the beta oxidation in mitochondria. So we do need to consume more omega-3 fatty acids as EPA and DHA because we are limited in how we can convert dietary ALA to EPA. So that's one of the reasons we developed Omega Plus. We developed Omega Plus actually with the thought that different cells in the body use different fatty acids. So EPA is primarily a cardiovascular fatty acid. It's primarily accumulated in cardiovascular cells, whereas DHA is primarily accumulated in brain cells. So if I remember the numbers correct, I think 40% of all the fat in the brain is DHA, I believe, in the health. So, and DHA is actually supplemented into baby formula for brain development. So, since there's so many cardiovascular products out there, we wanted to distinguish ourselves a little bit different and focus more on the brain because, and added a little extra DHA in there instead of loading up on EPA. So, but then we also added D3 because almost everybody who doesn't lay out in the sun is going to be D3 deficient. So, so in summary, then Omega Plus, of course, supports cardiovascular health, and since we have so much DHA in there, it supports cognitive health. It will help protect your cells, and it'll support a healthy immune system. So there you have it.
Wow.
I hope that your mind just a little bit. Let me see if I can get out of this somehow. There. I hope that opened up your mind just a little bit on why omega-3s are so important. Everybody toots their own horn and says, well, mine's better than the other. What really distinguishes ours from other things out there is it's very clean. It's caught, it's isolated from fish that's caught up in the North Atlantic, close to my hometown or home country. And we can trace every lot to the boat that the fish were caught on. So there's complete openness on where the fish is caught, where it's actually produced. We don't use any chemicals to squeeze the oil out of the fish. So it's a very, very clean product, actually. So
this amazing, Christina. This has been a huge mind opener for me, even down to the label, like just reading and understanding now even more of the nutritional fact panel on the product, the importance of DHA, and we always hear about it, right? But to actually kind of see how it works, why it works the way that it does, and the scale that we're on, the human diet, all of those kinds of things. And you kind of went into the North Atlantic and all up through there. Obviously, that's a much cleaner environment, fish are fresh, those types of things. But one of the things that's come up is we're catching two specific fish, right? Cod and pollock. Is it pollock or pollock?
Yes. So this omega-7, I believe, is the pollock.
Mm-hmm.
And, that one is caught up in the Alaskan waters. And then the cod is the omega-3s, and that's caught in the North Atlantic.
Beautiful. And just so everyone knows, this doesn't have an NFR2 component to it, correct?
No, we did not add any NFR to this one because it's so different. It's about cell membranes and its health. It's not about functionality of mitochondria or antioxidants. We don't want fatty acids to antiox because then it becomes rancid.
Right.
It's completely different mechanism, and it's all about cell membrane health. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And then one of the other things that was a few questions that have come up is we talk about, is omega plus molecularly distilled? And the answer is yes, but what is that distillation process?
I should have told me, I should have read up on it, but I did do a big slide on that. And if I remember correctly, it just means that it is several times distilled. So there's steam, and with steam, things separate out. So there's no chemicals added to separate out. So a lot of companies actually, what they do is that you have the backbone, which is a triglyceride in fish, and they take off the fatty acids, and then they want to concentrate it back and say we have a more concentrated product and things like that.
Right.
And we don't, this raw material doesn't do that. This molecular distillation doesn't, in this factory, doesn't do that. So you actually get the natural way of the way the fatty acids are attached to the triglycerides. So you're not altering the natural form of fatty acid. That's part of molecular distillation. You're not using any harsh chemicals. You know, you're just using steam basically, but you go through the steam cycle several times. I think that's proprietary information. I don't know how many times they go through, but they go through until they reach the concentration that they want to have.
That's incredible. So we're safe to take this with all of our products and different supplementations. I know we're supposed to say, hey, just talk to your physician with regards to what you're doing, or, you know, supplementation is a huge category. So when someone says, hey, can I take this with my supplements? Well, what supplements are those? With our particular product lineup, are we okay with that? Or are we talking about allergens? From my understanding, the allergens, if a person has allergens to cod and pollock, that would be the only allergens, correct?
Yes, I'm looking at the label right here. The allergens on here are just from the fish. There's no soy or anything like that in there. But think about it, as you're eating your food, say you have salmon on your plate or cod on your plate, you would take your supplements with food anyway, right?
Correct.
So this is all food ingredients. Basically, it's just regulated under dietary supplements because we're using it as a dietary supplement. So they should absolutely be safe to take. Some people may have a little bit of a GI distress just because they're just not used to it. You know, when they start taking it, they're just not used to taking supplements, you know.
Yeah.
They're digested, you know. So, but once you get used to it, or you take it with food to begin with, you know, and then if you want, you can just take it on an empty stomach. But, you know, so I don't see it being an issue at all, or it should be an issue. But as always, I know that if you're on some blood thinners or something like that, definitely talk to your physician about it, you know.
Yeah, one of the last questions, Christina, and I'll let you go because this has been such a powerful hour. One, demonstration, you know, visualization with this. We get a lot of people that aren't necessarily on the call, but they go back and watch the recording, and this is going to be a fantastic recording for them. One of the last questions that I have is, and it was an interesting conversation, I know Dr. Brian brought this up last week, was we have certain formulas depending on the region, specifically the Southeast Asian formula that recommends 4. The US-based recommendation is 3. But how does that work? I mean, obviously that's the minimum, but are we okay with maximum and increasing that? And I mean, what would you suggest on that?
Yes, you can take more of fish oil, at least for this one, because there's no toxic ingredients in there. It's just a fish oil. So, and the vitamin D as well. Studies have shown that if you take 50 micrograms of vitamin D3, you're perfect, which is 2000 IUs. If we go back to IUs, and you're perfectly fine. Fish oil, I don't think you can OD on fish oil. Well, don't say that, but to take a double dose, go ahead and take a double dose. The difference is, for example, in Australia, is the kind of claims you want to do on the label. They require a certain amount. based on the TGA, on their FDA,
Mhm.
on their country's FDA. So they require different requirements than what the US does. So that's why you may see some differences on the label at times.
Okay.
It's the same ingredient. Sometimes we're not allowed to use certain ingredients. Like in Australia, I believe we took the omega-7 out because they didn't allow it for whatever reason. That's why we have a super regulatory team, and they let us know right from the get-go.
So quick question. Okay. And this would remind me again, the super or the micro MCG, if we take 3 soft gels, it gives us 20 milligrams. You mentioned that 50 would be the ideal for the day.
Well,
on the vitamin D.
It all depends. So we all lather sunscreen on our bodies and all that stuff. And the 100% DV by the FDA is what we have in this product, is 20 micrograms. Literature has shown that you can do 2,000 IUs, which would be 50 micrograms, so 2.5 times this dose.
Okay.
But everybody's different. If you're outside all the time and you're playing, even you just stick your finger out or your nose out at the right. So it's got to be the right time of the year. It's got to be the right angle of the sun to hit your skin. It's got to be the right amount of time that your skin is exposed without sunscreen, that you actually convert the precursor of vitamin D in your skin to vitamin D in your body. So, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay. No, this is fantastic. One last question, and this is brought up by Nancy. Does it matter what time of the day we take our omegas? Some people, they love it at night because that's when the body goes into repair mode. Some people like it right with their morning breakfast. Does it matter?
It really doesn't matter.
Okay.
Just as long as you just get it, you can eat it with food, without food, you can eat it right before you go to bed. If you take what is it called? If you take an antacid, I would take it for a couple of hours before you take your antacid, because then your stomach pH and all that's going to be changed with your antacid, like Pepcid or something like that, So I'd be at least 2 hours before if you take that medicine. I would at least take any supplements 2 hours before.
2 hours before. Wonderful. Well, Christina, you've been amazing, and we're so excited. You've done a tremendous job with our product line, and I know it's interesting. It's fun to bring the people that are behind the scenes and really doing a lot of the extra work that sometimes us as field leaders, we don't know, right? We just kind of see the rock star Brian Dixon up front, and there's so many.
You can stay there. I'd rather be in the background and do my little puzzles and put it all together.
But man, it is so important for us. And we just wanted to say thank you so much for all that you do for LifeVantage, the product line, for us to be able to do our jobs. And, our overall reach is to just increase and benefit the world with our products in this company. So thank you for your part in that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely.
All right, guys.
We're all a big team. So.
Yeah. Well, look for the recording, guys. We're going to have this up on the Vision Summit YouTube channel shortly. It'll probably be there by this evening. You guys can use that link and push that out. But I know next week we're going to have, I don't even remember the name. Kiana.
Yes.
So we're going to compile about 20 to 30 of the top questions across the board. All products, all questions. If you guys can get that to myself or Greg or your team leaders, we're going to give that to Kiana, and she's going to be with us next Wednesday at noon to dissect those questions and have a lot of substantiation behind it. And then we'll have Brian Dixon followed up in a couple of weeks when he's back from the Philippines. So we've got a packed event for the next couple of weeks. And I just can't thank you guys enough. Keep changing the world, and we'll let everyone go. Take care, everyone.
Have a wonderful day.
See you later. How do I say goodbye in Swedish?
Hej då.
Hej då.
Hej då.
Hej då.
Hej då.
See ya.